If stories of perseverance like this touch your heart, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like to help us continue. The fluorescent lights of the 34th floor hummed a monotonous tune, a sound so familiar to Liam O'Connell that it had become a part of his own internal silence. For 6 years this sound had been the soundtrack to his nights, the score accompanying the rhythmic swish of his mop and the clatter of his janitorial cart echoing through the cavernous, empty halls of the Sterling Commerce Tower. At 52, Liam wore his life on his face and hands. His eyes, a pale blue that once mirrored the Irish sea of his grandfather's stories, were now clouded with a permanent exhaustion. His hands were a roadmap of hard labor, calloused and creased, with a faint stubborn line of grease forever etched beneath his fingernails, a souvenir from his previous life as a mechanic before the garage went under. Tonight was no different from the 1,000 nights that had preceded it. He worked his way through the pristine glass-walled offices of a high-end marketing firm. The space reeked of ambition and expensive coffee. Sleek, minimalist desks were adorned with photos of smiling families on ski trips and tropical vacations, glimpses into lives so far removed from his own they felt like scenes from a movie. Liam moved through this world like a ghost, a silent witness to the remnants of a bustling day. He emptied trash cans filled with discarded presentations, gourmet sandwich wrappers, and crumpled notes holding ideas worth more than he made in a year. He didn't feel envy, not anymore. That emotion had been worn down long ago, replaced by a dull, pragmatic ache of acceptance. His focus was singular: Chloe. His daughter was 17, a whirlwind of charcoal-smudged fingers, bright, intelligent eyes, and a talent that was both his greatest pride and his deepest source of anxiety. She was an artist, a real one. She could capture the weariness in a stranger's face with a few strokes of a pencil, or paint a sunset over their tenement building that made you forget the rusting fire escapes and cracked brick. Her dreams were big, centered on the Rhode Island School of Design, a place as mythical and unattainable to them as a castle in the clouds. The acceptance letter, a thin but heavy envelope, had arrived 3 weeks ago. It was a conditional acceptance, a beacon of hope tied to an anchor of financial impossibility. The tuition fee was a number so large Liam couldn't fully comprehend it. It might as well have been $1 billion. He'd tried everything. He took on extra shifts, searched for scholarships until his eyes burned from the screen of the old library computer, and even swallowed his pride to ask for a loan he knew he'd be denied. Each dead end was another small chip in his spirit. He saw the light in Chloe's eyes dimming with each passing day, saw her replacing her art school brochures with applications for jobs at the local diner. It was a silent, crushing defeat for them both, a quiet surrender to the circumstances that had always seemed to box them in. It was nearly 3 a.m. when he reached the executive suite, the last stop on his route. The corner office belonged to a senior partner, a man whose gleaming Italian shoes probably cost more than Liam's monthly rent. The trash can was overflowing, the result of what looked like a frantic creative session. Amongst the discarded papers and empty espresso cups was a thick, glossy magazine, Art Forum. Liam hesitated, his hand hovering over the bin. Chloe loved magazines like this. She'd meticulously cut out images for her inspiration boards, creating collages of worlds she dreamed of inhabiting. It felt like a small crime to let it be buried in a landfill. On impulse, Liam pulled the magazine from the trash. It was a bit crumpled and stained with the dark ring of a coffee mug, but it was otherwise intact. He'd straighten it out and take it home. A small, simple gift. As he tucked it under his arm, he felt something slide from between the pages and land softly on the plush carpet. He bent down, his knees groaning in protest, and picked it up. It was a lottery ticket, a Powerball ticket to be exact. It was as crumpled as the magazine, and the coffee stain had bled across one corner, blurring a couple of the numbers. He glanced at it for a moment. He never played the lottery. To him, it was the stupid tax, a fool's game of selling desperate people a sliver of impossible hope. The irony of finding a ticket here in this temple of wealth was not lost on him. Someone had likely bought it on a whim, checked it, found it to be a loser, and tossed it away without a second thought along with a magazine worth $20. He almost threw it back. It was garbage after all, someone else's discarded dream. But for a reason he couldn't articulate, he found himself folding the small piece of paper and slipping it into the worn pocket of his work pants. It meant nothing. It was just another piece of trash he was cleaning up. He finished his shift, the building now silent save for the hum of the servers, and began the long journey home. The bus ride was a familiar blur of streetlights and shadows. He walked the 3 blocks to his apartment building, the air thick with the damp chill of the early morning. He let himself in as quietly as possible, the click of the lock echoing in the small, still apartment. As he suspected, Chloe was asleep on the sofa, her head pillowed on a textbook. Her own sketchbook lay open on the coffee table, a half-finished portrait of him staring up from the page. In her drawing, he looked stronger, prouder. She had erased the exhaustion from his eyes. A familiar lump formed in his throat. He gently draped a thin blanket over her, careful not to wake her. In the kitchen, he poured a glass of water, his body aching with a fatigue that was more than just physical. He emptied his pockets onto the small, cluttered counter. Keys, a lint-covered cough drop, his worn leather wallet, and the lottery ticket. He looked at it again under the dim light of the stove hood, a forgotten piece of paper from a rich man's trash can. He smoothed it out and, with a sigh, stuck it to the refrigerator with a cheap souvenir magnet of a lighthouse. He'd check the numbers in the morning, just for the hell of it. A 5-second distraction before another day of the same grind. Then he went to his room and fell into a heavy, dreamless sleep. The next day, the ticket was forgotten, buried under the urgency of life. A leaking pipe under the sink demanded his attention. Chloe had a shift at the bookstore, and the mail brought another final notice bill. It wasn't until that evening, as he was listening to the radio while scrubbing the stubborn grime from the bathtub, that he heard the news report. The Powerball jackpot had reached a staggering $280 million. The announcer dramatically read the winning numbers, his voice filled with a manufactured excitement that grated on Liam's nerves. He didn't even make the connection at first. It was just noise. But then something a DJ said caught his ear. No jackpot winner was announced, but a $1 million ticket, matching the first 5 numbers, was sold right here in the city, at a convenience store on 4th and Main. 4th and Main. That was the little shop right next to the Sterling Tower, where the executives bought their coffee and snacks. A strange stillness came over Liam. He turned off the radio, the sudden silence deafening. His heart began to beat a little faster, a slow, heavy thud against his ribs. He dried his hands on his pants and walked slowly into the kitchen. The ticket was still there, pinned to the refrigerator, slightly curled at the edges. It looked so insignificant. Chloe was home, sitting at the kitchen table and sketching while she ate a bowl of cereal for dinner. "Everything okay, Dad?" she asked, looking up at him with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine, honey," he mumbled, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. He took the ticket off the fridge. His hand was trembling slightly. "What's that?" she asked, peering over her bowl. "Just a lottery ticket I found at work," he said, trying to sound casual. "Thought I'd check the numbers. For a laugh." He pulled out his old cracked smartphone, the screen taking an agonizingly long time to load the lottery website. Chloe watched him, a bemused smile on her face. To them, this was a joke, a moment of absurdity in their very serious lives. The page finally loaded. The winning numbers were displayed in a bold, cheerful font at the top. Liam held his own ticket next to the screen. His breath caught in his chest. The first number, your weight, it matched. He squinted. A coincidence, the second number, 15, it matched. His heart hammered. No, it couldn't be. The third number, 26, a match. His hand was shaking so badly now that the ticket was a blur. Chloe leaned in, her eyes widening. The fourth number, 42, a match. "Dad," Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible. The fifth number, 54, a match. He didn't win the jackpot. He missed the final Powerball number. But he had the first 5, the $1 million prize. Liam stared at the screen, then at the crumpled, coffee-stained piece of paper in his hand. The numbers didn't seem real. The world around him dissolved. The smell of the cereal, the sound of the traffic outside, the hum of the refrigerator, it all vanished. There was only the silent, screaming reality of those matching numbers. This piece of trash, this discarded afterthought from a stranger's life, was a winning ticket. $1 million. It was a number as incomprehensible as the tuition fee, but now it belonged to him. He looked from the ticket to his daughter, whose face was a mirror of his own shock and disbelief. The sketchbook, the bills, the leaky pipe, the 6 years of nights spent as a ghost in someone else's world, it all converged in this single impossible moment. He was Liam O'Connell, the janitor, and he was holding a miracle. For a long time, neither Liam nor Chloe moved. They remained frozen at the kitchen table, the silence in their small apartment thick with a momentous, terrifying energy. The lottery ticket lay between them, a flimsy bridge between the life they knew and a future they couldn't possibly imagine. Chloe was the first to break the stillness. She let out a shaky breath that turned into a wild, incredulous laugh. The sound, so full of disbelief and burgeoning joy, snapped Liam out of his trance. He looked at her, her face pale, her eyes wide and gleaming with tears, and a laugh escaped his own lips, a rusty, unfamiliar sound. They laughed until their sides ached, a cathartic explosion of years of pent-up worry and quiet desperation. It was the frantic, slightly hysterical laughter of people who had just been pulled from a sinking ship. Sleep was impossible that night. They sat up until dawn, drinking cup after cup of tea, talking in hushed, excited tones. They checked the numbers on the website a dozen more times, each confirmation sending a fresh jolt of adrenaline through them. By the time the sun cast its first grey light over the city, the initial euphoria had begun to recede, replaced by the heavy weight of reality. $1 million. After taxes, the lump sum would be somewhere around $650,000. It was a fortune, but it was also a finite number. It had to be handled with a wisdom that Liam, a man used to living paycheck to paycheck, felt terrifyingly unprepared for. His first instinct, born from a lifetime of ingrained integrity, was a troubling one. "I found it at work," he said quietly, staring into his empty teacup. "Someone else bought it. Does it really belong to us?" Chloe's newfound joy faltered. "Dad, they threw it away. They threw it in the trash. It was garbage. You didn't steal it. You found it." Her voice was fierce, protective. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the deep-seated honesty that was both his best quality and, at times, his heaviest burden. "I know, honey, but—" He trailed off. He imagined the man in the corner office, casually tossing the ticket away. Did he deserve this windfall? Liam, the janitor, the ghost who cleaned up after the successful? The question gnawed at him. But then he looked at Chloe's face, at the flicker of fear that had returned to her eyes, and the image of her art school acceptance letter flashed in his mind. This wasn't just about him. This was about her future, a future that had been saved by a 1-in-a-million chance. The ticket hadn't been lost, it had been discarded, abandoned, and in finding it, he wasn't taking something from someone else. He was rescuing a future that had also been thrown away. His daughters. His resolve hardened. This was their miracle. The process of claiming the prize was a surreal ordeal. After a sleepless day of frantic research online, Liam made an appointment with the State Lottery Commission. He took a day off work, calling in sick for the first time in 3 years. He and Chloe took the bus downtown, the winning ticket safely tucked inside a plastic sandwich bag in his inside jacket pocket. He felt its presence with every step, a secret warmth against his chest. The lottery office was a sterile, bureaucratic place, a stark contrast to the wild emotion of their discovery. When the clerk, a placid woman with thick glasses, fed the ticket into her machine, there was a moment of heart-stopping silence before a quiet chime sounded. "Well, congratulations," she said, her voice matter-of-fact, as if she were validating a parking stub. "You're a winner." Those simple words made it real. Liam felt a wave of dizziness, and Chloe gripped his arm, her knuckles white. They were led to a back office to meet with a financial advisor, a kind man who patiently explained the options, the annuity versus the lump sum, the tax implications, the importance of hiring a lawyer and a financial planner. Liam listened intently, his mind racing to catch up. He chose the lump sum. He wanted to erase their old life of debt and insecurity in one clean sweep. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, legal meetings, and quiet, monumental changes. The first thing Liam did when the money appeared in his newly opened bank account was gather every unpaid bill he owned. The threatening letters from the credit card companies, the final notice from the electric company, the stack of medical bills from Chloe's bout of pneumonia 2 winters ago. He sat at the kitchen table and wrote checks for every single one, his hand steady and his heart light. With each signature, he felt a physical weight lifting off his shoulders, a release of pressure he hadn't even realized he was constantly carrying. The most important moment came a week later. He sat Chloe down at that same table, now cleared of all the bills, and placed a single piece of paper in front of her, a cashier's check made out to the Rhode Island School of Design for the full first year's tuition, room and board. Chloe stared at it, her hand hovering over the paper as if afraid it would vanish if she touched it. Then she looked up at him, her eyes overflowing with a gratitude so profound it left him breathless. "You can buy all the supplies you need," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The best paints, the best canvases, everything. That was the moment the money became truly real. It wasn't about the number in his bank account, it was about the look on his daughter's face, the unburdening of her dreams. They moved a month later. They didn't buy a mansion. They found a modest, clean, two-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood with a small park across the street. It had reliable heating, plumbing that didn't rattle, and a spare room that Chloe immediately converted into a sun-drenched art studio. For Liam, the greatest luxury was the peace of mind. It was the simple act of going to the grocery store and filling the cart without using a calculator, of buying a new pair of sturdy work boots because his old ones were worn, not because they had completely fallen apart. He continued to work at the Sterling Tower for another 2 weeks, a decision Chloe couldn't understand. "Dad, you can quit," she'd insisted, but Liam needed to leave on his own terms. He needed to walk out of that building, not as a man who had escaped, but as a man who was choosing to move on. On his final night, he completed his route with the same meticulous care as always. He polished the floors until they gleamed and left the offices immaculate. At the end of his shift, he left his keys and a simple, polite letter of resignation on his supervisor's desk. As he walked out of the building's grand lobby for the last time, he glanced up at the 34th floor, a silent tower of glass and steel against the night sky. He felt no anger, no resentment, only a quiet sense of closure. He was no longer a ghost in its halls. With their future secure, a new question began to surface in Liam's mind. What now? He was too young and too restless to retire. The answer came to him one afternoon as he was driving their new used pickup truck and heard a familiar, distressing rattle in the engine. He pulled over, popped the hood, and within 20 minutes had identified and temporarily fixed the problem. As he worked, his hands coated in a familiar layer of grease, he didn't feel annoyance. He felt a spark of his old self, the mechanic who could diagnose an engine by sound alone. He used a portion of the remaining money to lease a small defunct two-bay garage on the edge of his old neighborhood. He named it O'Connell's Honest Auto. He wasn't aiming to become rich again. He was aiming to be useful. He charged fair prices, explained the repairs in simple terms, and often gave a break to single mothers or elderly customers who he knew were struggling. He was building something more valuable than wealth, a reputation for integrity and kindness. He worked hard, but it was a different kind of work. It was fulfilling, purposeful. The grease under his fingernails was no longer a mark of necessity, but a badge of honor. 6 months later, Liam was underneath a car, tightening a bolt, when a shadow fell over him. He slid out on his creeper and saw Chloe standing there, home for her first college break. She was radiant, brimming with a confidence and excitement that he had never seen in her before. She was thriving. "Hey, Pop," she said, smiling. In her hands she held a large framed canvas. She turned it around to show him. It was a portrait, but not of him. It was a painting of his hands, calloused, scarred, and stained with grease, holding a delicate, clean paintbrush. "I call it The Price of a Dream," she said softly. Liam looked at the painting, then at his own hands, and finally at his daughter, his brilliant, talented daughter, who was now free to paint any future she wanted. The $1 million ticket had saved them, yes. It had paid the bills and bought them a new life. But as he stood there in his own garage with the smell of motor oil in the air and the proof of his daughter's happiness right in front of him, he understood the truth. The real jackpot wasn't the money he had found. It was the purpose he had built, the future he had secured, and the immeasurable, priceless value of a daughter's dream, finally brought to life. True luck isn't found in the chance discovery of a treasure, but in the integrity we show when no one is watching. Liam's story teaches us that the greatest prize isn't the money you win, but the opportunity to transform lives, our own and others, with generosity and purpose. Fortune can fix material problems, but it is character that builds a legacy of happiness and hope. If you were moved by Liam and Chloe's story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories.